welcome to Human Ascension with Ellie. Today, I've invited a guest onto the show, and the person that I'm going to be speaking with today is Dr. Heather Lynn. Heather is a historian, but she's so much more than that. She actually has a background in archaeology. She has knowledge in technology and also religion, spirituality. She's done research on the ancient wisdoms and esotericism. And she also happens to be a bit of a risk taker. And so throughout Heather's life, she has sort of banged on the door. Well, let's just say she probably started off knocking lightly on the door, but if no one answered, she banged on the door of some of those topics that a lot of people in mainstream sciences dare not go. And she has answers, but she also is relentless. And I absolutely loved meeting with her. By the way, I went looking for Heather because I happened to read a book that she wrote. And this might sound a little bit familiar if you're a follower of the show. Recently, I did an episode on the Anunnaki, and there was a book that I relied upon for part of my research, and that was a book called The Anunnaki Connection. Well, Heather Lynn is the author of that book. And after reading that book, I really wanted to have a chat with her. So I popped her an email and I asked her if she'd like to be on the show, and she said yes. And I'm absolutely thrilled. So let's see how our discussion went between me and Dr. Heather Lynn. Hello, Heather, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you, especially after watching the piece that you did on the Anunnaki. I just was floored at how well you covered the material.
That was going to be my very first question to you, because this was a brand new subject for me. And I was going to ask you, did I get everything generally kind of well balanced? Did I have it generally right? Did I make any major mistakes at all in the way that I was describing?
I wouldn't say so. I think it's pretty well balanced. If just in terms of just a constructive criticism, if it were me doing it, I might have introduced some kind of contrarian sources, like the late Dr. Michael Heiser. He had a website that was, I think the website's still active, called sitchiniswrong.com. Now that adds a little bit of, maybe controversy there, but I mean, it's all good. He was an Assyriologist and a scholar, and he could read cuneiform. He was very well versed in the tablets, and he was really irritated with Sitchin. And so he made it his whole life's mission to basically go against Sitchin. Now, he was academic in his background, and he did a very good job with the research. But I will say he wasn't always kind of clear on his inherent bias, which was that he was an evangelical Christian. And so he approached the material from this biblical viewpoint. So, I mean, with that said, I mean, that's fine, but it's something that you should know then when you look into his text as well. So the most important thing when looking at all of the different sources over anything is to understand where people are coming from and where their biases could be. But then considering all that and taking all those things into account. But but otherwise, I mean, I thought you did such a good job, because there's a lot of material there, and a lot of people don't really. It's so much. I think you did a good job with the lineage, the relationships between the different gods and this sort of thing. And it's just a really hard thing for some people to wrap their minds around. And I really was like, wow, this is a really good job. I can't wait to go on the show now, because you already kind of did a primer for everybody. And I'm like, wow, I don't have to say a whole lot at this point. We can just get right into the goods.
I absolutely loved your book. I really, really did. And just before we came on the air, I told you I gushed a lot about how much I loved it. And what I loved was just that it was so balanced. You have this perspective. I can see that you're a professional, that you're coming from it from a historical point of view. You're looking at evidence, but you're also really able to express that open-mindedness about some of the things that we don't know for sure. And also the book wasn't so heavy or so light. It just had the perfect balance. And so it's definitely a favorite. I listened to it on audio, and I've ordered it to be on my shelf because I like to have it a physical copy of something that I've really enjoyed listening to. So thank you for writing that.
Well, thank you for reading it, and I really appreciate the kind words. It means a lot to get that sort of feedback because, there's a lot of different viewpoints in this kind of world of the Anunnaki. There's cults of personality who say, this is the only way. So, like a Michael Heiser sort of group where it's like only debunk, only debunk. Sitchin is always wrong. Versus the people who are very much like Sitchin is right. There's nobody else but Sitchin, and and so the issue that I always find with like particularly people who are diehard Sitchin fans, so to speak, is that there's really no place for fans or fanaticism in research like this. We're supposed to be able to look at everything and the information on its merits and evaluate the sources and discuss it and build upon that and try to reach some sort of objective truth. And so when you already then say, no, I'm a fan, I mean, it's one thing to like somebody and be a fan, so to speak. But when you get into the realm of some people where it's just like, there's no room for discussion, Sitchin said it, and therefore that's how it is. Well, Sitchin is gone, and his work is a little bit older now. And while it is fantastic and it stands on its own, there have been new things that come out, like often there's tablets being translated currently, and we have to be able to look at other viewpoints and see it within the context of everything else and just keep expanding. I even think Sitchin himself would be not a big fan, so to speak, of people just staying with his view and then just ending it there. I think he'd want people to keep going with the research and continue his legacy. But, I'm glad that there are some people who understand that and are open to the idea of taking the evidence wherever it may lead. And that's what we have to do. And when you do that, it's so much more exciting because you realize that we don't know any of it. Like, it's still a mystery. And so it's so much more exciting to find out that we're only just scratching the surface of what this all means.
So that leads me to ask you, how did you end up looking at some of these less than traditional viewpoints about things? Did you actually start off thinking you were going to just become a historian and an archaeologist and go down this route, and then something triggered your interest in a different direction? Or did you have always that spark of curiosity that there's more, and so you thought you're going to use the traditional teachings in order to find it? Which way did you go?
Well, I started off pretty untraditional. I left high school, so I didn't finish high school, and I ran away from home and I traveled. Oh, great! Where's fellow high school dropouts? But I did. I left and I traveled the country, and I was like sort of on a spiritual mission, and I had all kinds of adventures and misadventures, and found my way back and tried to go back to school, started at a community college, and just kind of, inched my way through. Yeah. See, I mean, it's a struggle sometimes. Not everybody has the opportunities that some do. And so I was able to kind of go and initially start out with something responsible like business or whatever, because I'm just like trying to do the right thing, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I had a professor, and it sounds like a very cliche example, but sometimes it's just true. I had one professor, an art history professor, who I turned in a term paper, and she said, wow, you really have something here. You can really write. You have and more so the ideas, because looking back, I mean, I suppose I could write, at a community college level. I didn't finish the 10th grade, so whatever that was, but she mostly complimented that I was able to put some of these ideas together that were lesser known. And she valued the fact that I went out of my way for the research project and went to libraries and went on purpose and took notes, and I didn't use the internet. I was just like hands-on. And she really encouraged me to follow through with that. And it was really just that allowed me the opportunity to think and to dare to think that maybe I don't have to do this in order to just survive. Maybe I could go to school and follow what my passion is. And I took a leap and I just started. I thought, okay, if one person believed in me, well, then maybe that's enough. And I just rode that wave, and I went into archaeology and history, and I didn't allow myself to be pigeonholed. Now, one of the things that got me interested in the, say, alternative world was, as a runaway, I lived in a car, so at least I had that. And I this was before, well, we had the internet, but it was like, you've got mail kind of internet. And so there wasn't really like podcasts and things. So I used to listen to talk radio. And one of my favorite shows that kept me company late at night on those lonely nights was Coast to Coast AM. So listeners might know that show or might not. It's still on with George Norrie. It used to be Art Bell. And I used to hear all of these people with all these wacky ideas. And some of these people were like very credentialed professionals, astrophysicists. Some were just, people who claimed that basically they saw Elvis and Bigfoot partying in the woods together before they were abducted and everything in between. And I used to think, wow, like what I would give to be able to talk to such strange and interesting people about such strange and interesting topics. Isn't that something? And I remember that thought going through my head. I was lying on the top of my old Pontiac and I was in the desert out west, and I was looking up at the stars, and the sky was enormous. It was almost making me feel kind of like disoriented. It was so big. And I was just listening to that car stereo and thinking, wow, who are these people? Where are these people? I don't know anybody like that. And so eventually I, just worked in fast food, and it was just kind of a dull life, but I always just had that interest. And late night, I would just listen to those shows and think, oh, there's interesting people out there. And it would just give me something, I guess, to distract and keep me company and keep my mind going. And so kind of like it left there. Well, one of my courses that I took was an introduction to archaeology course. And on the board on the very first day, they had a list of names of so-called pseudo-archaeologists. And part of our assignment was to select one name from the board and debunk their theories. Oh. And I was like, well, that's interesting because I don't even know what I'm doing. Like, this is archaeology 101. So how do I even have the tools as an undergraduate to but I didn't really question it too hard. And I did notice a few names that I recognized from being guests on Coast to Coast. And one of those was Michael Cremo. And I was like, he was the author of Forbidden Archaeology. And so Forbidden Archaeology, for those who don't know, is a very large book that covers all sorts of what he calls out-of-place artifacts. And it's what most people deem as pseudo-archaeology. But it was just, I didn't understand how it would be completely pseudo-archaeology when the level of research and review that went into this is just an amazing piece of work. And it to me just stood as something very academic. And I think it just was unpopular with people. So, I was interested in that sort of thing. And I remember just kind of going through and experiencing so many of these instances in my program where it was like more about making sure that you were kind of working within this code of ethics of the American Anthropological Association. It was a lot more about defending the institution itself. It was about it just highly politicized too. There was just a lot more to it than I had realized. And over time, go ahead.
No, you go.
Oh, over time, I worked as in my state school, I worked as a teaching assistant, and I worked in the archaeology lab, and I did some programs with an archaeological it was a Center for Community Research thing. It was this whole thing where we were taking high school students from sort of disenfranchised areas and bringing them in and teaching them archaeological methods and preservation and this sort of thing. So I was involved in a lot of just community work. And here I am, trying to get grant money and whatnot. And I noticed we were going to a lot of really nice parties. I mean, it's really nice. Like it was really very high end. We went out for cocktails a lot. It was, one different museum we were at. There was the first time I had ever eaten from a chocolate fountain, I was like, this is very good. So I was like, what is going on? So at one time over dinner, I come with this report about the grants that I had found. And I somehow I had mentioned something that was scoffed at. I don't even remember what it was, but it was just something casual, this will, I don't know, get us through to whatever month. And one of the advisors sort of laughed, and mind you, people were pretty tipsy at this point. She was like, well, we're not really going to use that money for that. And I was like, oh, okay. So what do I put in the, do I have to rewrite the budget? I don't understand. And she was like, well, no, this is just to supplement our income over the summer. And I was like, well,
Wow.
and I was like, okay, well, I guess I kind of get that, because there was a byline of like, well, we'll get paid. It's not like we wouldn't get paid for the summer, but I wasn't understanding that this whole thing. She said, no. We are not coming to the college over summer. This was just, side money. And I was like, what about the kids? So this is a lie? I've been doing something. And they're like, well, let me tell you how it really works. And this was a small time state school in Ohio. So this wasn't even like something massive. And this is the level of like corruption, money laundering, and all of that was going on. It was ridiculous. And I was very sort of let down. And there were so many times I was let down in this program where, the cynicism of it, like, I remember bringing a book. It was like about some like Egyptian thing. It was really just, I think it was a magazine. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Look at this. And one of my professors was like, oh, how funny. You're still into that? Like, I was just some kid. And I was like, well, I mean, it's cool. It's like Egypt or something. And he's like, everybody gets into this for that reason. It's just get over it. And I'm like, I get it. I know we're doing serious work, but let somebody be excited, right? I'm new to this. And another example of that was I was like at this a museum event that was to promote the archaeology program. And they told me I could be in charge of the print collateral and the advertisements and sit at the little table. And I was like, sweet, I'll do that. And they just wanted me to get it done and be there. And so they said, just do what you want. Okay, great. So I made these flyers and I get there and I pass out the flyers and they are just not having it. And then afterwards I got a stern talking to, and I was like, what is going on? They said, these flyers, they're too much. And I'm like, too much? Why? And let me tell you, they said it's too like Indiana Jonesy. It looks too fun. I was like, this is a museum day for the kids. This is supposed to get people interested. And they were like, we never promote that. It's like against our ethics. Never promote the commercialization of archaeology. And it just makes it, it takes away our credibility. And that's what I found all the time, was that it was always this defensive sort of like thing. And then the politics. And I was like, okay, I've had it. So I thought, I don't even think I'm going to finish this because, I'm a rebel anyway. I left home. I'm like, whatever. So I ended up though emailing Michael Cremo because I was like,
that's an interesting twist.
So I thought, let me ask him. He's a real sort of like, maverick. And I don't know. I didn't think he'd email me back. He's an author. And I was like, oh, why? I'm just like
not half as cool as you are. You emailed me back.
Right. So I emailed him and I was shocked that he did write me back. And not only did he write me back, but he did so in such a caring, paternal way. He talked me up like, he talked to me like someone should have talked to me and said, listen, settle down. You're faced with two choices right now, and here are the paths. And the first is to stay in academia and do legitimate research, but know that you're going to be bound by these things and you'll only be able to slightly push the envelope. So there's that. Or you could leave and do whatever you want and really break some new ground. However, you'll always be faced with that level of skepticism. It'll be a lot harder for you and you'll miss out on the actual knowledge, which I'm like, well, that's true. And then this whole idea that if you are against something, how do you even know how to properly be against something if you don't know what that something is? So I thought I need to stay here and learn and understand. And so I have the proper tools to be able to articulate things. And also not everybody's wrong about everything. So let's really just look at this and not just be so emotional about it, I guess. And that, I think what it was the fact that he responded at all gave me that little encouragement, just like the art history professor, that was just enough for somebody like me who was a dropout and who had no family. My mother had died, so I didn't have anybody. And so it was just enough to kind of push me along. And I'm forever grateful to him for that. And he totally knows it. I've told him a million times.
That's wonderful.
He's wonderful. Yes, he's a really great person, became a mentor. And so I thought I'm going to stay in. And the way I'm going to cope with this madness is to observe and to kind of be like a double agent. I'm going to take what is good and understand what they're coming from and be able to try to maybe play devil's advocate, maybe see what's good, just be here as an observer, like a participant observer, as they would say in anthropology. So I did that. And then afterward, I just found that I think history was a better fit for me instead of just archaeology itself, just because of the way the discipline was limiting in terms of what you could actually do. And with history, there was a little bit more of a social science philosophy approach to it. And I thought, well, I'm going to do that too. And so I have a very varied background with multiple degrees in anthropology, archaeology, information technology, history, and comparative religion and education. So I was just like, I'm going to go for whatever, and I'm not going to be stagnant. I'm going to take all those things and apply them, and that's pretty much how I've approached it. Now, when it comes to the Anunnaki specifically, that came to me. I didn't go looking for that at all. I found so I had a blog a while back, and I'm just kind of doing my thing and researching, and I found that there was a news story that went across the sort of PR. It was just like a press release that was saying that there was a new discovery in Ur, which was phenomenal because nobody's been allowed to really, nobody, especially from the West, but nobody in general was allowed to go there to excavate. This would have been in Iraq. And because of the political and war, all the turmoil that was going on. So this was kind of big news that there was a university. It was the University of Manchester in England. They said, we did this. This is amazing. They had a little blurb on it and they put it out to the press. And I was like, I have to know more about this. I shared it with my Facebook followers, and I contacted the university because why not? I mean, that was part of the benefit of staying in the system, is to say, I don't have like a fear of it. I don't have like imposter syndrome. I just as much right as anybody else to contact people and inquire. And so I was happy to say that they talked to me, and I set up an interview, and I was very excited. So I told people, hey, I got this interview. I want to, dig a little deeper, no pun intended, to see some of the details. Do you have any questions? Anything you'd like me to pass on? And so I gathered some questions, and I provided the questions ahead of time, and I was ghosted completely. And I was like, okay, so Professor Campbell wouldn't respond to me after that. We were all go until I submitted the questions. So then the first question is, well, what were those questions? Well, thankfully, I put this in a special report. It was called the Sumerian Controversy, and I put the email thread in there so people could see that the questions, albeit, I was trying to do this in a democratic way so that people had a voice. And yes, people would naturally ask about, say, Anunnaki things. But I didn't actually say, hey, is this the Anunnaki? I would say, listen, there are people who are inquiring about the existence of this or that or the other. What would you say to those people? Now, I don't find that offensive. I think that if you are a public intellectual, if you are a professor, if you're working in the public trust, you're taking public money, then you owe the public answers to their questions. Even if you think that they're kind of goofy questions, that's really not your job to judge that. It's your job to educate. So it's an opportunity to educate people in whatever you feel they need educated in. But no, it's better just to ghost, right? So he ghosted me, and I thought, no, we can't do this. So that made me more curious. So then I followed the money. Then that is, and I was really kind of like on a to do this because I had received an email, because like I said, I had this blog and I was posting about this, and I had somebody from Iraq email me and say, please help us. They're taking our heritage. They're taking things out. They're bags and bags of these tablets. And I was like, I don't really know what I'm sitting here with, I'm in pajamas reading my email with a coffee. I can't help you right here. But but I felt like I had to. And now I'm curious, and I'm like, okay, I'm on this. So I start researching who was funding this and what were they looking for and what was going on, because it seemed pretty mundane until you look and see who's funding it. That's what took me down the proverbial rabbit hole of conspiracies and everything, cover-ups and everything. So briefly, this is available on my website. It's the Sumerian Controversy. I think there's a version available on Amazon for a few bucks or something, but it's free on my website. So you can go download that. It's probably about 50 pages or 30 to 50 pages. I don't remember at this point. It's been forever, but I logged all of this as I went and what I found, and I brought the receipts, as the kids say. And what I show is that the people who were funding this excavation, they were, first of all, it was the University of Manchester, and they are just working. So it's easy to just blame archaeologists, but they're just doing their jobs, and they're not usually kind of the corrupt people, except if it's that low level, we're going to use grant money to do whatever. That happens. But on this, it's where did they get their money? who funded this whole thing. So then you look and you see that this was a joint effort with many different institutions, but a few in particular stood out to me. One of the biggest was Baron von Thyssen of the Thyssen family dynasty. So this was notable because Thyssen, he at the time was known as somebody who had the greatest collection of antiquities, second only to Queen Elizabeth, except they couldn't know for sure because they weren't really sure of her holdings and they weren't really sure of his, but they knew basically neck and neck. This is one individual. Okay, so he had a great interest in these particularly Near Eastern antiquities. So that's interesting. Okay, fine. The next was big oil. So in particular, a company who is called Gulf Sands Petroleum out of Texas, who was wrapped up with the Bush family dynasty. And so there were all these just different links to old money, big business, and whatever. And they're funding this. And the archaeologists, when they would do their field reports, would do those field reports first to the people in the corporations. And then it would trickle down. And I was like, this just doesn't seem right. That seems like a conflict of interest. And so I just basically wanted more transparency, and I stayed on them and was a thorn on their side until they finally started making more transparent access to their digs and whatnot. So, but my concern there was just the lack of feeling that you had to be accountable to the people. And the concerns that others have, even the people within the community there themselves, they were like, what are you taking? What do you, And then when you consider all the looting that is known to have happened by the U.S. military, and that's not a conspiracy, that's public record. I mean, that happened. Like, what were they looking for? What's going on? Why the interest in all of these antiquities? So that kind of piqued my interest, because then inevitably people said, well, Heather, it's because there's aliens. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know about that. It's because there's stargates. And I'm like, well, what is a stargate? Like that movie?
And when you say people are saying that, who are these people? I mean, you have to give their names, but what kind of people are we talking about saying this to you?
The first people who kind of like alerted me to this were just simply people who were following my blog or those types of people. But over time, and because of that, I always felt a responsibility to look into this, because I eventually became a professor and I went back to the community college level because I wanted to be that art history professor that made a difference to somebody else. And so for me, the idea of public education and teaching people was like extraordinarily important. And so when people were asking, I felt like I had this obligation to, okay, you want to know? I want to know too. Let's go find out, because I don't know. I can't know it all. And I would investigate these things. Well, so I didn't really go in with like an opinion, really. I mean, I had some thoughts. I knew something was corrupt and weird, but I really wasn't thinking it was aliens. But I mean, I'm open. I don't know. There's a Nietzsche quote. I'm very much into existentialism. And so I'll quote Nietzsche. And one of the things he has said was, there are two types of people in the world, those who want to know and those who want to believe. And that old poster of like, I want to believe. I don't want to believe. I want to know. I don't want to be a believer. I want to know. So I do follow the things that might be unconventional, but that's because I just have to know. So I found myself going down those sorts of ventures. But over time, what led me to keep following that was that I would talk to people who were highly influential, who had lots of resources, who had connections that were, I saw things, learned things, and realized there's something else here. Now, I still don't know what all of it is, because just because somebody has maybe like $1 billion and they have been, I'm going to say, just because they might have access to $1 billion and have used part of that money to fund congressional investigations in the United States. And if anyone Googles all of that together, then they might know who I'm talking about. Just because that person has told me things and is interested, it doesn't mean that what they say is right. Because there's one thing too. You can have, say, outlandish beliefs. If you're poor, it means you're crazy. If you're wealthy, it means you're eccentric. It just still, so you just have to take everything with not skepticism, like always debunking, but just a critical lens and discernment. And so this led me down all these paths where I couldn't believe the intersection between things like spycraft and archaeology. And then eventually I found myself researching the occult. And when I say the occult, I don't mean necessarily like the kids in Hot Topic back in the day wearing the black and everything. I mean, although it does sometimes aesthetically look like that, the hidden. And I found that like the famous saying in the book title of All Roads Lead to Sumer, that's what ended up happening. And so I just couldn't get away from this, where I thought there's a mystery here in Sumer, and what is it? And so that's been about a decade that I've spent working and researching, and then eventually teaching, because I integrated that into my courses that I would teach at the college level with like cuneiform and this sort of thing. And it's just been an adventure ever since, because there's so much here. Like, they don't want us to know, and they go to great lengths. And when I say they, I mean a lot of interests. Earlier, I think you even sort of hinted at this or mentioned it in your presentation. One of the earliest things that people knew is that if you start telling everybody about this new discovery of these tablets, it's going to cause a lot of religious doubt, because it pushes back some of the timeline of, say, things like Noah's Ark or what have you by thousands of years. It also gives a fuller picture of the story, which may or may not be beneficial to people who are pushing a particular agenda. So there's lies by omission, so people don't want to talk about it. There's also this, elitist viewpoint where it's like not for us to know. There's people with vested interest in it who maybe just want to go get some of the antiquities. And I know this firsthand. This is not just accusation. I have been contacted before by people in positions of power who literally sent me a set of very high definition photos of tablets that were behind glass, the museum glass. It looked like a museum, and I'm thinking, oh, it's a museum. They were asking my help in translating it or looking for the origin of it. But what I noticed that was peculiar about it was it wasn't in a museum. It was a museum display in somebody's living room where there was a huge sectional and a big screen TV. It looked like a penthouse view. And here I'm looking like, these are people who, have this. And so I'm telling you, every door that I opened, I just found new mysteries. And I thought, there's all kinds of people interested in this for various reasons. And there's misinformation and disinformation. And there's also the real truth of the stories. There's more cuneiform tablets to translate than there are Egyptian papyri. And that in and of itself is astonishing.
It is. And the thing is, you had me from the moment that you said in community college, when you were, wherever you were, where you were studying archaeology right at the beginning, and the very first thing they had you doing before you even knew what you were talking about was that you had to debunk a pseudo scientific theory. That is conditioning. Mm-hmm. That's telling you before you know anything, we're going to condition you.
Absolutely.
And that was a red flag for me immediately, because as soon as, and I've worked in a different field to you. I worked in policing for a very long time. And in exactly the same way, there was a lot of discussion about an appearance. There has to be an appearance of spending money wisely, the public purse wisely, and doing the right thing, and the word appearance kept coming up. But when you actually get higher and closer to the center of whatever it is that you're working in, and any government department or anything that is scientific or educational or anything, the higher up you go, and the more you know, the more you realize that there's a thin facade of something, but there's something else happening behind it. And that's what's really, really hard to be able to see, but it's there. And you seem as though you've experienced exactly the same thing I have, but I think your area is far more interesting than mine.
Well, it can be, and interesting is a good way to put it. So so that's basically how I got into this. I like to say that I didn't choose the Anunnaki chose me.
And so it was your relentless curiosity that just kept you going.
It really did, and it has to this day. And I'm glad, because, as we discussed previously, I think before we got on, the book that I wrote, The Anunnaki Connection, was my first attempt to sort of really take a look at this and look at the different theories. And I didn't have my own real theory, really, because I'm just trying to look and see what's out there. And I'm really cautious about putting out a theory, because a lot of times you can do that, and then people either by themselves, they'll just say, oh, you know what, I think I'm right, and then they start pushing that theory, and then you just become part of the problem maybe. Or you just, you get closed-minded, and or people just look at that theory and think that's, I just am real like hesitant to really get out there. I don't want to write a fence, because I am here to find the truth, but I don't want to claim that I have the truth, because how can I? But I've always taken that approach, which is, let me investigate everything and see what is left after picking it apart. And and that's what I did with this book. And I wanted to see how my thinking would develop over time. So I included like very hardcore research, scientific research, but I also included accounts from other people, some that might seem out there, so to speak. And I tried to put as much in there as I could. And then by the time I was finished with the book, though, I did start to develop at least a hypothesis that I wanted to investigate further, or at least more research questions. But I was running out of book, and I was like, oh no. Okay, well, and so I end the book with some of this, like, maybe like almost musings, like perhaps it's this, maybe it's this, I don't know. And I didn't intend on a cliffhanger, and maybe it's not one, but in my mind it was one, because I was also left hanging on a cliff. And I was like, I have to study this further. And so then I did, and I have, and I'll announce it here. I have a new book coming out. It's in the editing phase with my publisher, Red Wheel Wiser. It'll be from New Page. And it is a follow-up to the Anunnaki Connection. It is the Anunnaki Revelation. And that's where I reveal a lot of things that were hidden, a lot of things I've learned along the way, a lot of sources, a lot of different material, and a few things that I was very excited to present, because I sort of solved a few puzzles. Did not solve the entire mystery, but I put some puzzle pieces together firmly. And I want to put that out there and just see what other people do with that, and see if we can get together and, solve something. But yeah, I'm very excited about that. And thanks for letting me break that here.
I am very excited too. And I was wondering how long it was going to be before I let it slip before you did. I actually, and I especially like if you've closed the circle on some things and solved some puzzles, as small as they may be, that's the beginning of something. And it also helps us to know that we're not going crazy sometimes when we see things that seem to point in directions that we're getting a lot of resistance on. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very excited to read your book, and I will definitely be devouring it as soon. When is it likely to be published? When is it? When is it available?
I think the pre-order is going to come available in the next few months, right. But I think the actual book is going to be available at the very end of the year. So it has some months still. But if anyone wants to keep up on it, they can go to my website and sign up for alerts.
I might end up seeing whether you might like to come back when
I will.
When you're about ready to announce that it's available.
Oh, absolutely.
We'll have another chat. So can I ask you, Heather, this is all just amazing. And I love the way that you kind of fell into it, but also that relentless maverick. Is there a female version of maverick? Maverick sort of style that you have kind of reminds me of myself, where you're a bit of a dog with a bone. And anyone who tried to condition you is in for a bit of a surprise, because you probably, as soon as you sense that, your ears prick up and you think, oh, there must be something there that I can find if I just keep pushing. And I'm very much the same. But what are some of the things that you feel comfortable perhaps telling us that you do believe? I know that you don't want to believe, that you're more a curiosity. But based on the journey that you've taken so far, is there anything out there that you can say with confidence you've come to believe based on the things that you've seen?
There are. And so I put it out there with like an asterisk. I usually want to put in the book, here are, because it's research. So here's all these other people's beliefs, here's the evidence, and then at the end, and here's what I think. And so you take it for what it is. But I found something that was I think really important and not often discussed when talking about this. If you were to say Google the Anunnaki, you're going to see all kinds of pictures. But most of those pictures that come up are actually not Anunnaki at all. And that is very important because that kind of puts a whole different spin on things. And it's like, well, then what are they? And how are they not Anunnaki? I mean, that's what they're showing, right? Mm-hmm. Well, that's the problem with a lot of surface level information. What we're looking at, particularly, and this is the case when you see the winged beings. So whether they're winged beings that have the pine cone that they're holding, or the winged beings that sometimes have a bird face in Assyrian art and different eras that way. But the winged beings that are often called the Anunnaki, those are not Anunnaki. So like, what are they? Or they're what's called the Apkallu, and they're very different than the Anunnaki. And they're very different in very fundamental ways. And that's where the plot thickens. So
that's interesting.
I tried to figure out some of the ideas behind the Sitchin story, we'll say. Like the way he has used translations, he's kind of he has his own interpretations. So this is where people start to get in the weeds and say, well, this tablet means this, Sitchin said that, etc. That's fine, and that's a valid way to look at it. But if you kind of take a more zoomed out look at it and say, okay, but regardless, what is the story actually telling us? What's going on? So what we're looking at is definitely just one group of entities coming in and meeting with another, and quite plainly enslaving them, making them do their bidding, making them work, and then creating a civilization sort of within that. And that civilization is basically like a superstructure to enslave these individuals. Now, there's benefits from it. The individuals, they get to enjoy, the perks of farming, agriculture, what have you, more safety because of laws and order. But there are also consequences. You see that they lack the wild sort of connection anymore. You see this is a lot in the book, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the first story, the first epic. It's all kind of trying to grapple with this idea of the civilizing of the wild man. And so you start to see these themes over and over again of enslavement and worship, and then the priest class, and then this whole idea of the stratification of people. And so like it's one thing to use our own language. If I say a priest, it might conjure up the image of like a Catholic priest, a guy with a little collar or something like that. If you say like to worship, it might conjure up an image of someone just kind of bowing and just going, oh, I'm worshiping. But to look at the actual like origins of those words, it means something different. Specifically, the word worship means to work for. So that puts a different spin on it. It's not just to uselessly kind of bow down or to bring animals and then burn the offerings and just let them burn away. It was quite literally the act of going out and picking off the very best of the herd to go and cook them, to give them meat as your workers. You are working to give the meat then to this like higher class.
Right.
And so when you look at it like that, you start thinking, what are we looking at? This is really strange. So in a lot of ways, what I've tried to do is look at different traditions and historical interpretations, and even archaeobotanical evidence and migration. I've used the work of David Reich at Harvard to look at actual genes, the genetics of people, to find out like where people migrated and all of this. And if you look at when a lot of this started happening, the dates of it all align to be around 12,500 years ago, which would have been around the time of the Younger Dryas impact event, which people still kind of claim is not a thing, but so many scholars say, no, there is a thing here. So I just have to put that caveat that it's still debated, but it's so not debated. Like at the same time, like there's very good evidence for this. So there was, and at least if not for the cataclysm itself, at least for the massive, almost instantaneous climate change that happened in that moment that allowed for the melting of ice caps and flooding of regions, and then causing a great migration of people, death of people, and a migration as well. And then you start seeing a possible influx of people going into regions where they hadn't seen other people before. And you get this situation where perhaps it's that the Anunnaki themselves were not necessarily aliens, but instead foreign. They were people from other lands. And not just any people, but very advanced people from perhaps what they say is a pre-flood people who were highly advanced, who brought the sciences, who brought all of these things. And in doing so, they enslaved at the time, semi-settled hunter-gatherers in the region. They brought their language, they brought their sciences, they brought their traditions. And when you look at the behavior of these so-called gods, they're very human in their behavior. Like, part of the corpus of texts that are available are literally cookbooks for these worship feats. Like, this god doesn't like the meat boiled, he wants it, roasted. They have all these preferences. Of course, they cheat on each other and they murder each other, and they're just very, ill behaved. And until some of them feel bad, you have Enki, who then feels bad for these enslaved individuals.
We like Enki around here.
Yes,
like
yes. So he felt bad, and but part of the control mechanism was the language, that they spoke the language. The priest class, the scribal people, they needed to also speak the language because they had to be the go-between. Like, okay, the god said it's going to rain, if you don't do this or what have you. The thing is, Enki taught everybody using the language. He said, no, I'm going to go teach the individuals how to speak and how to read and how to know what we're saying. And so now they can become wise too. And so that was a rebellion. That was bad. People equate that with Lucifer and Prometheus and all of these different bringers of enlightenment. And so that's a whole thing there. And if you just stop there, first of all, the anthropological evidence is really strong for that, for it being that these were displaced climate refugees who came in and interacted and enslaved a population. So it has a very human tone to it. But if you just stop there, then it doesn't answer all the questions that remain. So you have to push further and say, well, what were they? How do they have this information? What are these other beings? Why are there the Apkallu? Why are there conflicting statements? What's going on? Origin stories, things like, Enki gave the information to the black-headed ones and, freed them in such a way. But the Apkallu, the sages, some of those came out of the ocean. They looked like fish people. They were the first to give the information to the gods. Like, there's a lot of strange conflation there, and it's just not clear until you realize that it's quite possible what we're looking at is the accounts of the Sumerian people, who they're telling their true story, because they're not going to just make this up. They were very good record keepers. They're not going to just make up like fairy tales on top of it. So unless they did, and they did make fairy tales because they explicitly said, here is our story, Epic of Gilgamesh or what have you. Even that, though, has roots in nonfiction. So not everything was a lie. They weren't trying to lie to us. They were writing for themselves and they were telling their truth. So it's our job to look at that and figure out, well, what were they actually saying? Well, my view is that the Anunnaki individuals were migrants from an advanced culture. Sometimes people call that Atlantis. Some people call it Hyperborea.
That's what I was going to ask you. Do you think they're Atlanteans?
So I think that is a strong possibility. And I think what happens is they brought their religion and practices with them and inadvertently taught other people. But that's why the link to it is so sort of hazy and strange. And then it gets conflated and then sort of like absorbed like a religious syncretism. So that made me have to go look into this Apkallu phenomenon. And that's when I found everything that I had to include in the book that is coming out, because it is like very specific. They were using hallucinogenic drugs to communicate with these beings. I have evidence of that. They were using particularly poppy. The opium poppy was something that they revered. And if you look at some of these images, and this is like a hot button issue in this kind of Anunnaki speculative world, what is the image where there is this like winged entity and he's holding a pine cone and he's usually like facing or at least behind a king, what looks like a king who doesn't have wings. And sometimes he's holding a handbag. They often call them the handbag of the gods. And he's often wearing these, what they call wristwatches of the gods.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's like, what is this image? And we keep seeing it pop up over and over again. Well, what I propose is what we're looking at there is what they call the Hulgil rite. And what that was a ritual of opening the third eye, anointing the new king as he's going to now be able to speak to the sage. Because remember, the Apkallu were called sages. And when you looked at the Sumerian kings list, the kings themselves were assigned a sage who was the person who sort of like they channeled this, like this, like the to be a king, you had to be able to channel these entities, and they were specifically referred to as semi-biological entities. So that's a notable thing too. Like, what does that even mean? Were they plasma? I mean, that's just speculation there, but that just leads to more questions. Like, there's something strange going on here. So if you consider an Anunnaki king, and perhaps this is like a very human king, a survivor of the flood, a descendant from the survivor of the flood, and then you see that they have this like sage who has now anointed them and been able to communicate with them, and that's how they get their wisdom and their edicts and whatnot. It just paints a whole different picture. And then you start seeing that, okay, so they revered the poppy. Now, when you see sometimes these Apkallu, if they're not holding one of the handbags of the gods, or sometimes if they are, it depends on, the individual. Maybe one's holding a handbag and another a pine cone. Maybe one's holding the handbag and then another thing. And it looks like some strange little stylized tree. It has like little bulbs on it. It's just, people say it's just some stylized thing, like they don't know. There's all kinds of speculation over what it is. But native Iraqi archaeologists, one in particular who is very renowned during his time, who later has been disappeared. He, and whose work was very hard to come by, I'll say, he explicitly outlined all of the things that were found by him after the Americans and the British came and sort of found what they found. He went back over the site and found one of the largest collections of gold ever to be found. He found, and this is on record. This is not like one of these rumors where it's like maybe they did find some, ancient Egyptian statues and this and whatever. This is on record. The University of Chicago has this. I have the book. I've cited the book. So this is real information. He found more gold than you could ever imagine, along with many, many different artifacts. And he went through and he wrote in both his language, Arabic, and he wrote in English because he wanted this information to get out and not altered in any way. And so he logged everything, knowing it could be stolen or lost. And it is a huge, huge work. Now, in that, he discusses these things, these little like things that they're holding. And he rightly points out these are poppies. These are opium poppy. And when you start to look at all of the different iconography, they have these little flowers everywhere. They have the pods, what's on the top of the pod. And then you start looking at the watches themselves, and they look identical to a particular part of the poppy that, can be used to collect the milk, they call it, to make this substance that they called like the joy plant, the whole gill. And it opened people up. It eased their pain, but they would mix it with other things too. So this was a sacred art. This was like a rite that was not something like some like conventional like recreational drug use. It's something that was done for enlightenment purposes. Well, what's interesting too is when you look at this whole kind of poppy connection and the third eye connection and all of these different things, you start saying, okay, well, what about these watches, because people call them the wristwatches of the gods, and some people suggest, it's evidence that they had this ancient technology like watches. So I'm looking at it thinking, but they look like there's poppy, like they're revering poppy. Maybe it's something to that. I don't know, So I'm looking and I'm finding this guy's work, and I've looked for like a couple years, and I happened upon one of the only pictures remaining of the actual, I guess, wristwatches, for lack of a better term, that were found by the Iraqi archaeologists. They found these in this gold hoard. They were in gorgeous condition, and they took pictures of them and logged them as they knew they needed to and should have. But those pictures, this was before a lot of digitization, and so it's not widely found online. And you can look and see these are the wristwatches. Well, first of all, they're not watches; they're just cuffs. But they're not just any cuffs. When you examine them very closely, they depict the whole gill rite in art going around them of the Apkallu anointing one of the kings. And it's in the view of this like a poppy flower. So it was like these were sacred ornamental pieces that they were using in order to do the sacred rite. And so what we're looking at here, and you can't say things in a definitive way, but this I can say definitively, these are the cuffs, these are the wristwatches, so to speak. And there's been things hidden, there's been things looted. A lot of it has to do with gold, of course, but what it leads me to think is there's a whole world here that we don't know, that the Anunnaki and then subsequently the Sumerians themselves, they were the inheritors of not just the things that we know, like great science and technology and agriculture, but also spiritual science, that with them came very advanced spiritual knowledge. And that is something that I think is maybe the most important thing that we have lost and that we need to look at. And I think to me that has made the quest even more important. And it kind of fills in some gaps too. Like perhaps maybe this is something that other people who have had access to some of this information before, maybe that's what they know. Maybe they know that the true value of what the Sumerians had with the Anunnaki was the spiritual sciences that they've kept secret and locked up in mystery traditions and perennial philosophies and all sorts of things that they keep hidden from us, and also just basically occulted. And so, and based on interviews I've had with different people involved in, say, like military operations and whatnot, there is some strange sort of like occult aspect to this idea of particularly the rebellion with Enki. And that people are very much interested in trying to hone the techniques that they feel that happened when going through this particular ritual or this rite. And so it's just opened a whole new door of investigation, in my view, that, well, I mean, I include it all in the book and I go down different rabbit holes, and I think it just expands it. It does leave more questions, of course, but I mean, any good thing does, right?
There'll be a third book and you'll never get rid of me.
Right. But I think it pulls together some really interesting like features of a little bit of everybody's viewpoint. I really think that what happens is, I think there's an old parable, and I'm probably going to get this totally wrong, so forgive me, but it's like the blind men holding the elephant, and each one has like a piece of the elephant. And if you ask each one of them to describe what they're holding, they're going to accurately describe basically just what they're holding without ever really being able to describe the whole elephant. They're going to be convinced because of their senses they're holding that, and they'll be right, but only partially. So if we can just sort of look and see if we can find ways to integrate a lot of these things, I think a lot of people, whether it's Sitchin or Paul Wallace, myself maybe included, even the late Dr. Michael Heiser, mainstream archaeologists, however you want to put it, I think we all hold an important and factual piece of this so-called elephant that's been standing in the room the whole time. And I think through a careful, honest investigation, and not just eliminating or omitting people from the discussion, we may actually be able to come together and put the puzzle together and see what we're really looking at.
This is actually a really important point. And one of the things, I mean, obviously I don't have the same education background as you. I probably don't have the same ability to access the people who surround the topics that you're looking at day to day. And so for me, I'm kind of clunking along at a different speed, from a different perspective, or from a different beginning. But one of the reasons why I wanted to do this show was because, everywhere you go, there are all of these different perspectives. Some of them are spiritual, some of them go more down the religious route. And then, of course, there's all these different religions and beliefs. And then you have the folklore, and you have those that are ET-based or angelic, or all of these things that people experience. And I do feel as though they all have an element in them. They're just a different perspective, but there's an element that runs across the board where everyone is right a little bit.
I agree. I really do think that.
We're so busy arguing with each other that if we just stop and recognize they were all right a little bit, we might be able to put the jigsaw puzzle together.
Maybe so. And I gotta say too, I've been really disappointed in some of the directions of the conversations about this lately, because in addition to like the cult of personality thing that I mentioned, there are people out there who find that there's great money to be had in writing about the Anunnaki or speaking on this topic or what have you. And so it's an area ripe for exploitation, and it's scary. And I like to try to caution people on that. And of course, I can't really speak too hard on that because I am writing books and selling them as well. So I'm not, innocent in that regard. However, it doesn't take long before you look around YouTube and you may find people who are trying to sell you timeshares or something based on knowledge that the Anunnaki gave them. Or, there's a lot of bad actors now in this. And I believe that some of that is just purely, human and money oriented. Yeah. And I think that some of it is also disinformation that's put out there. So to try to distract us from maybe actually coming together and looking at that and finding the truth. And that just leads me to think, if that is the perspective, if that's really what's going on, then that means we're just all onto something and that there's something to be there. So we got to keep looking. We have to keep asking questions. We have to keep an open mind. And I am of the time where I remember going to some of these conferences a long time ago. And, some of the older people were a little more open-minded about this kind of thing. And it used to be so fun to have your view and then meet up afterward, and the speakers would get together and talk. And if you didn't believe what the other person was talking about, maybe you didn't see it from their perspective, you listened and that was it. I can't tell you how many people in this industry that I've shared space with that I thought, these ideas are just like totally out there. I can't get on board with this. And in fact, I think some of it's completely factually incorrect, but the person, they believe it. This is their work. They're presenting it. And who am I it's not, nobody asked me. So you just
listen. Yeah.
You
listen and hear it.
You'd be respectful.
At least, yeah.
Yeah. And also, who's to say you don't have crazy ideas like to somebody else? So we all have to share and give space for each other that way. And I think that it feels like a lot of that's kind of gotten lost along the way with, a lot of different interests and people capitalizing off the topic and stuff. So I would just caution, just use discernment and just really take a look at sources and things. And if it sounds too good to be true, that it probably is. And if somebody's telling you that they know something without a doubt, that they have the answer, then run away. Because how unless you have a time machine, which some people claim they do, then they got it. And then, and who knows too. I mean, my friend, I wasn't big on the time travel stuff because I was like, I just can't quite accept it. But my friend Mike Ricksecker has recently started to convince me that there's something to it. So if you're not familiar with him, he does a lot of like these shows of different things, and he has a couple books on time travel that I would highly recommend, and very interesting. So I don't know, maybe we can get in a time machine and go back and see for ourselves, but I haven't been able to do that. I just have to read.
Yeah. Well, I totally understand the perspective, and I think I try and do that here as well. Now, have you still got your podcast? You've got a podcast?
Yes, I have a podcast. It's called The Midnight Academy. We're on a little hiatus right now as I had to kind of move and do some things at the studio. And so I've been filming a couple things to kind of load for the second season. The first season was a little bit of maybe we'll call it a beta test because I wanted to just see, hey, anybody into this? And so I just got a lot of my friends to come on and do some shows, had a good time. And I'm like, I think we should give this a go. So coming back strong for a second season here in April. So, April.
And writing. I'm glad that you're writing. And you've also written a few other books, haven't you, that are not Anunnaki based. Mm-hmm. The Anunnaki Connection is the only book that I've read so far. But you've also written, I think, why don't you tell me? You're the author.
I have a book called Evil Archaeology.
That's right.
It's about, the origin of demon. It's a lot based in Sumerian demonology and that sort of thing, exorcisms. Right. And it's about like sinister relics. And I interview exorcists and paranormal investigators. And I try to see, like, is there any truth to this sort of thing. So I look at that. And then I have a book kind of on the spooky side also. I have one out right now on Baphomet. Baphomet is the sort of goat-headed figure that's really spooky and sits with this whole like, hand gesture and is looking pretty foreboding, and it's very controversial. So I go on it's not a huge book. It's more of an introductory book to get people to understand the origins of this symbol and how it's evolved over time and what it actually means. And I'll give a spoiler here. I mean, spoiler alert, the image that we're all familiar of Baphomet, first of all, it's not the Baphomet that was related to the Templars, which that's like the origin of the word Baphomet. So there's a big break in between that. There's no pictures of Baphomet except for this one illustration that came out in the 1800s. And that illustration that we all have come to know as this spooky demon figure was actually illustrated by a French Catholic priest. And his intention for this was to show sort of the unity of God's love and acceptance and things you would never think when you're looking at this creature, right? So it's a very interesting, weird like history of like symbolism and Gnosticism and all of this. And so spooky looking book, but it's a historical observation about duality that way. And then, and I have some backlist ones. I have one, Anthrotheology. That one is coming out as a re-release. It's going to be updated and revised. That one is more about spiritual science and consciousness and the origin of consciousness and like divinity within God, within humans, and how we can kind of have that divine spark ignited or reignited. So, I mean, basically all my books, though, if you go to my website, you can check it out, and you can find everything there.
I will make sure that your website is in the description for today's episode so everyone can check you out. And I am really looking forward to reading your book, and probably all of your books. I have to admit, I probably will read them all.
I'll send them all to you.
I am binging at the moment. I've never read so much stuff in my life, and I'm trying to speed read. Because every time I read a book, especially if it's fascinating, it takes me down a brand new rabbit hole, which means I have to read more and more and more. And my brain is so full of stuff.
It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think a lot of people who are curious by nature are probably experiencing exactly the same thing as I am. Heather, it was just amazing chatting with you. And I have to say, your background is making me just have to rethink. I just look too bright and daytimey, and you've got a dark and serious kind of.
It's always midnight here at the Midnight Academy.
It is. Well, it's beautiful. It's lovely.
Thank you.
I think we make a wonderful contrast here, especially different hair colors, different backgrounds, different everything.
Yes, but it's like a duality.
But still lots of similarities as well, especially that curiosity, which I really love.
I know. Oh my gosh, I could talk to you all day or night, depending on where we are.
It's been absolutely wonderful having you on the show. And I do hope that you will one day return, perhaps when the Anunnaki revelation is just about to become available, at least for pre-order.
Absolutely. Anytime. I really was so happy to be able to talk to you. And again, many congratulations on the show that you have. You've done such good work. I was so pulled in. And then what you did with the Anunnaki episode was just so well researched and well presented. And you just really did the topic justice. And I'm going to recommend it to everybody as like a primer on the Anunnaki and an introduction too, because it was just so well done.
And I do plan to do more as well, because I found the topic absolutely fascinating. I really, really did.
Well, the truth is out there.
So great to see you.
It was so great.
So that was my chat with Heather Lynn, the author of Anunnaki Connection, and also the Anunnaki Revelation, a new book that's going to be coming out later this year. I have to say, when it comes to all of her books, I plan to read them all, but when it comes to this next one, the Anunnaki Revelation, I am planning to devour that one, and I cannot wait for it to come out. Because as anyone who knows me even just a little bit knows, this question of the Anunnaki and who they are and what their relevance is to humanity has just captured me. I'm absolutely fascinated. And we now have this hint that perhaps, just maybe, we are the Anunnaki. we might very well be the descendants of the Anunnaki, maybe based on a hybridization, based on a revisiting. And the Anunnaki might even be the Atlanteans that everyone has sort of been talking about since the days of Plato. Oh, the mind boggles, doesn't it? It is the endless rabbit warren of discovery. And I absolutely love going in every direction I need to. This was a great chat, and I got to learn a lot speaking to Heather. And I do hope that you've enjoyed this episode as much as I have, because I'm intending to invite her back if she will return. I'm not sure I'm going to give her many choices, to be honest. If I had to get on a plane and fly to the US to get her back on the show, I'm intending to do that. The funny thing is, once we stopped recording the episode, we did our little goodbyes, and then we accidentally got caught up in a conversation, which I'm kind of bummed that I didn't record, although, it was a little bit casual. And it turns out we have so many things in common, nothing to do with our background specifically, but just the way that life is. Sometimes it just seems as though we are pushed by the universe to be where we need to be in the moment that we need to be there. And sometimes it's difficult to explain. But Heather and I were talking about that, and it appears we were both kind of given a nudge. Ultimately, as of today, it has resulted in us having a chat, and who knows where it's going to take us next. But thankfully, tomorrow is another day. And as Heather says, the answer is definitely out there. My name is Ellie, and you can find me at Ellie Dreams Down Under on YouTube. Thank you so much to everyone who is watching or listening on one of KGRA's broadcasting platforms. If you would like to become a member of the KGRA viewership family and hang out with like-minded experiences, watchers, spiritualists, and weirdos like me, and maybe a bit like Heather too, I think we might have that in common, then just go to live.kjradb.com and choose Ellie as a promo to get 30% off your subscription. That's it for today. It's been a pleasure. Until next time.